Resistance begins with intimacy. Before any protest or organizing, before legislative process or philanthropic endeavor, before the trailblazing scholarship of privileged higher education, before even that first kiss or sexual act in the murky waters of sexual identity formation, before even the bully at the playground, there is the home. I can't help but return to that intimate location. It is in that domestic space where one cultivates a sense of intimacy. Intimacy, neither defined as good or bad, is a disarming term, yet the act of intimacy, much like any enchantment, always leaves its mark on the body. And within the body. I think of the foster home or orphanage when bio parents have left a child claimless. I think of the streets when adult guardians or kin absented themselves from care or contact. Whether it's the adoptive home, the group home, the care facility, the church, or the nuclear home, no matter the space or dwelling, as a child, you are always in close association with another. In my case, I learned intimacy from an adoptive Black family. When such early close proximity to them gave no clear indication that I looked like them, the question I asked was, who do I look like? And where do I come from? Such questions disturbed their sensibilities. My adoptive parents worked at crafting the kind of family that could serve as a model, respectable. They were even willing to withhold certain truths for their achieved aims. Since neighbors and strangers alike simply saw a Black family without distinction, no one asked the questions I asked, and yet no stranger or neighbor had such intimacy either. It was an act of resistance to disturb my caregivers with questions of origin, of source, especially when they grew comfortable with my silent and willing acceptance of them as my only source. Most adoptive parents feel the same way as mine. While they rightfully may be our only parents for those of us adopted, it is not accurate to say they are our only source. And even when my adoptive parents told me all they could about pre-them, I was not fulfilled. Still, places in my body felt the gap. My mind knew that there was a loss. My heart felt the separation, yearning to be made whole, seeking reunion with the biological sources that patterned itself into new life. These two Black adoptive parents of mine were born in the segregated South during the 40s and 50s of racialized America. Annie McDonald and Johnny Morris journeyed north, settling in New York City during the 60s at a time of incredible resistance. Both of them informed by and the recipients of civil rights struggle that gave birth to a dramatic shift in Black civil and social life, leaving legacies of racialized separation and terror behind them. They sought a new life where they could be free, where they could craft a new narrative. Leaving family behind, they could create a new one. Legally sanctioned forms of intimacy with white folks and the resources they held onto so tightly, were fought for and won, and new kinds of resistance were born as racism and white supremacy mutated from de jure segregation to the ambiguity of de facto apartheid. White flight from sidewalks, neighborhoods, towns, and regions redlined, and other newfangled, nefarious policies coded in language to obscure white fear of Black presence. Its aims were not only to stratify Black and white bodies throughout spaces, but to also eliminate Black presence from consciousness. blackness is always with us. Resistance begins when we dare to feel and speak the truth. History at its ethical reach attempts to capture a truth about the past. Art at its ethical peak serves to expand and express a truth of our interior worlds, utilizing the imagination. History and art has revealed to us that black bodies are everywhere, have been everywhere, and have existed since the beginning of human presence on Earth. The art piece that best represents African presence of antiquity is the Olmec head, its grand bust symbolizing its significant impact and presence in pre-Columbus Mexico and Central America, dating from 1200 BCE to about 400 BCE. The Olmec civilization is believed to have been the progenitor civilization of later Mesoamerica. There are multiple theories to suggest its presence is not African in origin, despite compelling research that suggests otherwise. Regardless of what art historians detail about its origins, one cannot refute the power of its appearance. I'm not speaking from the place of science. Rather, I'm calling for a passionate witness of the senses. Before heading to research that is outside knowledge, what do you see? Upon close examination, what do you see when looking at the Olmec head? If we look at that square jaw, the broad nose, and the fullness of the lips, we are invited to see very specific details of the body that are closely associated with features sourced to Africanness. If we were to touch the sculpture, what would we feel? If we betray our senses, if we resist what our eyes see, we return to the betrayal of our bodies, the betrayal of what our eyes witness, betrayal of what our senses perceive, and ultimately, we return to the white supremacist notions that serve to erase the black body from consciousness and its place in history. I'm drawn to this sculpture because it reminds me that pasts do not have to be daunting or haunting, that the beauty of blackness was exalted prior to colonization, that the black body can also be ahead of a specific time and place. I'm drawn to this sculpture because it calls out to the part of myself that seeks to be whole. It raises my spirit and self-esteem. It shows me a face that has not been colonized. It challenges and resists notions of home as purely exterior or geographic specific. Rather, to me, it suggests that home is within the body, within the imagination, within the mind. Seeing the Olmec head returns me home. Uncovering art and the production of art serves resistance struggle as a reminder, a time capsule, an archive of what was and what is. It returns us to memory that can forge connections with the past, long forgotten, or even disavowed. We must remember that memory is a resistance struggle against forgetting. We enact a habit and behavior of memory by returning to the body, by crafting an intimacy with the past, by taking up the mantle of resistance.
What is the role of an artist in the time of unrest and upheaval? Yeah, like I was saying, like I think that there's like kind of like two ways of approaching, or there seems to be like this polarization of the way that you approach making artwork and One is with intention of critique, social critique, and the other one is kind of this intuitive, like kind of indulgent, like, oh, I just want to make this and fill in the blank. I personally try and bridge both of those two things, but I see in a lot of artists, I think, particularly white artists of specific like kind of class and education, I think working in the second modality, so like working in a way of just being like, oh, well, I just want to, I can't even, oh, well, like, I just want to, draw pictures of mountains, or, I just want to embroider flowers or something without, using art as an opportunity to push further and to question further. So I'd like to say that I think I personally only respect artists that do that use art as a tool to heal or to critique or to make change or to question. But I am aware of a large existence of artists that don't do that, and don't feel like they have any responsibility to do that. But, if you look historically, it's like artists are at the front of, so many movements, whether it's like designing garments or designing flags or emblems or logos or posters or newspapers, getting the word out, creating propaganda, creating materials for resistant movements. And, I think the artists have always been there, and they've always been an important part of movements and social change. But I guess something that I think is problematic is when it exists only in white spaces. So exists only in galleries up on the hill at Cornell, for instance, or only in these really elite places in New York City, and it's not really showcasing artists whose voices are, or it's not showcasing artists that are doing these things and pushing on a ground level, I think it's a very elite language that they use in these spaces, and I don't really know where I'm going with this. That's just something that really pisses me off. But, okay, so going on, the artwork that I'm choosing is the one where the indigenous person is harvesting the cochnia off of the cactuses for dye. What about this artwork has inspired or changed the way you view personal and universal liberation? I don't know how to answer that question specifically, but the thing that I find inspirational about that work is, well, one, I'm a textile artist, so the history of dyes and dye plants and their cultivation and the way colonialism has interrupted that or affected that and shaped that is really, really interesting to me. So, all throughout history, we find different instances of colonialists stealing knowledge from, oppressed peoples all over the world, stealing their techniques, like whether it's like how they grow a certain plant, like for instance, like, here in North Carolina, like in the 1700s, they couldn't figure out how to grow their own indigo. So they used, the knowledge of their slaves who had come from West Africa and have a really rich understanding of how this plant works and the chemistry behind it. And so they used their knowledge and their techniques to create this huge indigo industry. So that, that's just one example. So they've been doing that with like dye techniques, plant techniques, even, different designs, embroidery techniques, you name it. Colonialists have stolen it and then repurposed it and resold it to create a huge amount of profit while keeping the oppressed. So what I really love about that piece is that it talks about the reclamation of that knowledge, and it talks about the keeping of that knowledge sacred for indigenous peoples. And I feel, that is an act of resistance. And that, again, because we're resilient people, that's been happening simultaneously as the stolen knowledge has been happening as well. I don't know if that made sense. All right, why did you choose this artwork? I think I've answered all of the questions. I'm sorry that this is kind of choppy and I'm sniffling and stuff, but let me know if you have any more questions, any further questions that you want me to answer. And thank you for letting me be part of this. You're super cool, and this is an awesome project. Okay, bye.